coming. We just had a storm here, so we just had people right now. They're knocking on the door to just try to sell us on a new roof, but the dogs were just going crazy. So I just had to put them away and tell the people that no, thank you for right now. But yeah, so then we got that information from him. So he was like, like I'll sell it, and so then he sent us his information. And then we start underwriting it. So is that what you want me to talk about? You want me to share the screen? You want me to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of conversation we had on Friday, then kind of using that information to do the underwriting. You can share your underwriting if you want to, whatever you're comfortable doing. Hold on, I'll make you a co-host so you can share as well, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, he actually, for an older gentleman, I mean, he's got a lot of properties. I've gotten stuff from owners before where you try to piece together rent rolls if they even have anything, like you kind of pulling teeth to get information to plug into your numbers. And he actually was pretty organized and had just a one pager where he was generous enough to even give himself some vacancy, which you don't even see that. So he sent us his rent roll or his P&L with all the expenses and was just pretty open about it. So but with that, he did include it that he had vacancy of about 7%, which then you gotta kind of double check, because on a smaller size property, this was not listed, but he sent us as a 14 unit, but in reality, it's only an 8 unit, but he had some other garage units, which he was counting on as extra units. So obviously that was not it, and he had that income included into the rent and everything. So have to separate that, so pull that out, and then from what he had is just 2 units that were vacant and one that he had just leased. So in reality, he had a 7% vacancy, and with underwriting, you assume that there's also got to be some debt. And with one vacant unit on an 8 unit, that's actually 12.5% vacancy, not even just a 7%. So you kind of got to adjust a little bit to that. Did you make me a co-host, Gene?
Yes, I did.
Let me see. So I can share. There you go. Okay, so let me know if you can see the underwriting sheet.
Yep, it's real small. We can see it.
Okay, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Not too much. Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so with I'm not familiar with how many people just here have seen this or in the course. I think it's most of us. So, but in case you haven't, in case you're newer and you haven't, this is pretty handy tool James, Nicole have developed. So allows you to pretty quickly kind of figure out if it's worth diving any deeper. So just going through the asking price here, as I said, he had sent us a 7% vacancy, but in reality it's 12.5. And being a little generous, not even counting on any debt that could kind of linger. So we still I left it at 12%, which is about 8,000 or so. So then his expenses were actually pretty close to this. Yeah, I think he was at 52% for us. So with what we added a little bit, it was pretty close. And then initially with some of the rents that he kind of mentioned that we could get, or that the market could bear, it seemed like it was something that was pretty close to his asking price. So it was interesting. So we were underwriting it with that. And digging deeper, as you could see, and this is what the calculator can helps us with, is we're actually pretty far off with some of his numbers. So the NOI was only at around 31,000, for which he wanted 650, and as you can tell, for that to be true, he was almost selling his property. at a 4.5 cap in a smaller town in Pennsylvania. So definitely not going cap rate for the market or for most markets right now, even. So I mean, we're still waiting back to see some numbers, and we're still kind of in the middle of it, but it looks like it may not be something that works out. But I mean, this is usually, kind of what happens. I don't know if I could talk a little bit about this might be small.
Oh, the regular sheet. Yeah, go ahead.
So going a little more into detail.
You want to just for the people that don't know, because I mean, the students obviously have this, but everyone else doesn't. So where these numbers come from, would you mind just kind of outlining what the tabs are underneath so they understand where this comes from?
Yeah, of course. So if you can see the tabs, I mean, first of all, we have the sniff test. Like as I mentioned, it's a really quick to kind of give us a little bit of guidance if we're close or not. Initially, we were a lot closer with some of the initial numbers that he has sent us. So I think we were at a 9 cap being a 600,000. So we kind of decided to dig deeper. And then we move on to your base information, which then I don't know if it's then we just start splitting, what the unit mix, how many units, and what do they consist of. So there were 4 and you get average rents, gives us monthly rents with the vacancy that we have. And all this stuff is pretty much what is gonna end up going over to the cash flow section. This first section, which is pretty much from 7 to 14. We kind of get that from the base information. Here we can have, assuming the market rents, it kind of gives us a little bit of what the spreads could be on some of the different units. And asking price, and then what ideal price we would want to be at, and how far off we are from their asking price. This is something that it's Nicole and James have done an excellent job of making it so much easier. Just this kind of saves so much time and just having information that you kind of plug in and it spits out great information. From the owner, we were able to get a lot of these numbers. There's still some information that we were, you want to dial in a little into what some of the expenses are. We adjusted some, we kept some we try to get information from some other property managers. But whatever we could, we were able to fill in ourselves, and in reality, with what our expectations or our numbers, the expenses are a little bit higher. We're taking into account having a management team, and we kept a lot of his costs, and we were still a little higher. So with that, considering that we're seeing that he's running it a little higher, we thought that there's some room in it to kind of go in and maybe change operations and do a better job of having the expenses be less, maybe closer to a 50% or a 45%, especially for a smaller asset. So we're in the middle of kind of figuring some of those numbers out and tightening those up. There's some numbers that he provided to us, which you can't really change to an older asset. I mean, he had $937 per door per year for repairs, which is pretty honest. Most of the times, especially if you get information from owners or even brokers, you won't get like a repair or maintenance number. So with that, I mean, you also can plug in, what the cost per acquisition is. I mean, I kind of left it for a little bit down the road, but just wanted to see what the cash flows would be. So again, from the baseline, this kind of just fills itself out, and we just kind of change or tweak a little bit, what the rents we expect per year that is going to be increased. And if you haven't seen, is this like most people else, but what I love about this calculator or this sheet, if you will, is that you have the ability to separate different value add phases. So for this example, I just kind of divided it into 4 different phases of the value add, because we're interested in buying something if there's room for value add. And what I did with that, I just simply got the current rent roll and some of the market rents are, and I just saw I did phase 1, the ones that had the biggest spread or the biggest opportunity to increase, and I started with that, and then kind of kept that going across. So that's how you get that's how we were able to get for 2 units that are way under market. On the first year we rehab those 2 units, we would have gotten about 850 extra a month, which is about 425 per unit, which is a lot. But some of these rents are still pretty under market, so that's why that's spread. And considering that we would have still been maybe $25 to $50 under current market, which, as Nicole said at some point, and James as well, you definitely want to be a little under what the market is, so that there's no you don't have any trouble kind of filling those units. So I kept those there, and what that does is it just kind of moves everything across for the next year, and then it adds it into your income. So phase 2 is something similar for the next set of apartments. Phase 3, and as you can see, you can kind of stretch out when or what year you're starting this. So phase 1, what we're starting in year 1, and you see that's why you see the results or the increase in income by year 2. Same thing with with phase 2, where you see it in year 3, and so on with phase 3 and phase 4, which was we can only increase a little bit because some of those rents have already been increased, so there wasn't much room. And the garages that I mentioned he had, I just said if we increase $10 on 4 of them right away, that we could probably do that. And I've seen a few different calculators, and I haven't really seen one where you can actually be realistic about when when the income is going to increase, which makes it the spreadsheet be able to give out us better numbers or true numbers. Because sometimes what I've seen with some calculators is they just assume a value add right away, which won't happen right away. So you're bringing all of this value add from year 4, let's say, into year 1. So that's what I love about this calculator, because you can actually be more realistic and kind of spread out as you would once it becomes a real business plan. And from that, I mean, we were still some of the areas, this is red. Obviously, we'd like it to be green as a DSCR. And so just a few indicators that were so low. Here just showing that the cap rate in reality is at a 4.4s, which is what they want. And I don't know, James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we want to be at the very least at a 6 on year 1.
So the general rule is overall, right? Because obviously a lot of this stuff is driven by interest rates. So overall, we'd like to be at least a point above whatever the interest rate is, right? Because we don't want to be borrowing money and paying more than our return is going to be, because that is just a recipe for failure, right? So if the interest rate is at 6, right, we'd like to be at 7. The overall rule on top of that is by the end of year 2, right, beginning of end of year 1, beginning of year 2, the way the spreadsheet is, it basically kicks out at the end of year 2. We want to be at an 8 cap by then, all things being equal. One of the things that's interesting is that, everyone was like, oh, 3% interest rate and 3.5%. And, oh my God, it's 7.5%. Historically, right, for a very long time, if you look across the board, interest rates for commercial property have been in the 5.5%, 6.5%, 7%. So this is kind of the way it's always been, right? We just had that huge dip in interest rates, which kind of why they drove cap rates down so low, and people were very optimistic when they underwrote that. We continue to underwrite the way we underwrite, and obviously we've been very lucky. But yeah, exactly. So you want to have that spread, Freddie, to your point.
Yep. And then so that's pretty much in essence, what the She does, and I mean, if anybody has any question at any time or any help looking at any numbers or any deal, then yeah, feel free to reach out. I'd love to help. And and a little bit of how we got to some of these numbers. I mean, we just kind of try to dial in specifically on what the rents or what the market is. So that involves in some of the smaller towns or some of the smaller places. Facebook, Craigslist still we use for that to try to get some rental comps. Calling some of the property managers in the area. Facebook actually has a lot of what becomes real, because sometimes if you're just looking at apartments.com, you may not get a few apartments or that may be real comps, and then you may just see some of the ones that are managed by bigger property managers or bigger properties with some amenities. So you definitely just want to kind of build a true some true comps just from going through all these different places. That, and then besides, we were lucky enough to get some decent numbers in terms of expenses that made sense to us from the owner, and that allowed us to kind of reach some educated numbers on where we could be, where we should be, and where the seller is. And then what that's a different strategy now that we know what the owner wants, what the property actually supports, and then that gap or where we can meet in the middle, and that's the art. And that's sometimes where James also has some of his experience in magic.
That was awesome, Freddie. Thanks, man. That's really cool. So it's funny because Melvin had talked about here to kind of learn and stuff like that. And what I want to point out, and I pointed out in the chat, is that whether you're buying a fourplex, in this instance an eightplex, or a 300, 400 unit property, or an 800 unit portfolio, and we've done all of those, we use the same basic fundamentals for everything across the board, right? So for a 300 unit, we'd be looking at it just like this one. And for a 40 unit, we're looking at just like that. It's just basic fundamentals work for everything. I had a guy call me the other day asking about single family. And I said, to be honest with you, you should underwrite a single family just like you would a property. It's all about cash flow, right? It's a business. You're not buying based on the appreciation unless, you're a betting person. You really should buy on cash flow. And this is what, Freddie pointed out is so critically important. So a couple of things here. So expenses are something that to some degree you do have some control over, right? So on average, right, across the portfolio, we run about 45% expenses when you add them all together, right? Now, having said that, different size properties and different type properties run at different expense ratios, right? So for example, a mobile home park where the tenants own all the homes, they run at 35%. A smaller property like this, maybe we could run, depending on insurance now, which is incredibly high, we might run like a 40, 41%. Most others will run like at 45%. And then we don't have anything that we really run at 50%. But what will happen is we love to work on stuff that needs a lot of work. We like stuff with hair on it, if you will. So one of the things that we did is we actually are able to tweak the expenses every single year, right? So what happens, you take over a property, you have a budget that you hope you might hit, but you're kind of playing with it for the first 6 months. After a year, you've actually got some numbers and some proof of concept, and then you kind of adjust and kind of move towards the numbers where you want them to be. But if your expenses, like in some of these places, are usually very low, right? Because they're not counting a lot of stuff, or there's a lot of deferred maintenance. Some of these places, though, they're running 60, 65%. So for us, that's a huge value add because we have a system that we implement and we manage the managers and we hold them accountable. We've got certain benchmarks they need to hit to be able to be part, I guess, of our system, if you will. But you're not going to go from 65% expenses to 45% expenses or 40% expenses in a year, right? It's going to take you a little while, if you do it conservatively, to bring it down. So it might be at 65, then maybe go to 55, then maybe go to 50, then maybe go to 45, right? And that's at least the way that we recommend people underwrite. Now, if you are ahead of the curve and you crank and you go from 65% to 46% in 1 year, that is fantastic. You'll just make more money. But if for some reason something happens, like this crazy insurance or something blows up or whatever it may be, at least you're covered, right? You're not going to lose money, right? You'll always make money if you underwrite conservatively. So a couple of things there. Sniff test is awesome if there's enough upside. Obviously, maybe you do want to go through the old underwriting thing that even though it showed on the sniff test that maybe it wasn't a deal, below that it actually says, you know something, if there's enough value add, you might want to take a little bit of time and take a look at it. Now, if we had looked at this and there was no upside and in the underwriting, you know, the price we'd have to come in at was so low that it didn't make any sense, great, we spent 10 minutes, move on, you know, kind of thing. The whole idea is to underwrite the ones that have a possibility. And then as you get more information for those that have a possibility, then you kind of keep sharpening your pencil as you go along. Again, you know, we don't count any of our income until year 2. So kind of what Freddie showed you on that 4th tab. For the idea being that if I buy a 100-unit property and I think that I can rehab 80 of those units, right, to be able to get to market rent of whatever, you know, an extra $200 or $300 a month or whatever it may be, I'm not going to be able to do that in a year because I'm going to have an empty building, right? And your biggest expense is turnover. So I have to step it out and go, great, you know, I'm going to try and do maybe 20 or 25 the first year, then another 20 the second year, and whatever it is, and kind of space it out little by little. And yes, you want to get those turned as quickly as you can, but you absolutely do not want to have any vacancies. So that's the beauty of the system, is that it allows you to say, okay, to Freddie's point, which is a great point, you know, you want to do the ones where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck, right? So the 2 bedrooms, I think, was the biggest spread. Or maybe it was 1 bedroom, so I can't remember which one it was. But, you know, you try and identify those first, all things being equal, you go after where you get the biggest return on your money. And then again, to Freddie's point, you know, market rates are critical, right? So when you are buying something, right, your top line revenue is what a lot of people base their entire business plan on. And if your market will not support your top line revenue, it's kind of a fool's errand, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have looked at offering memorandums and they're like, oh yeah, you know, they're 25% under market or whatever it is, right? And then you do the math and you're like, well, in some instances, wow, you're not under market at all, or, oh, you know something, you're really like 12.5% under market, you know, kind of thing. So it is critical really to do your due diligence there. And to Freddie's point, apartments.com, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, or whatever it is, other property management companies, direct calling, just Google, you know, what are some apartments that are similar to this one and kind of call those directly. It is a pain, but you will end up being much, much more successful if you understand what your top line revenue is, because again, the market controls that for the most part, right? You can adjust to the market as best you can, but if you are adjusting to a number that is not market specific, again, it's kind of a fool's errand. The other stuff, you know, expenses and vacancies and bad debt and a bunch of other stuff, you do have some levers that you can pull. But if the top level for a C-type apartment that's got, you know, all rehab and stuff like that is $1,400 a month, and you're playing calls for $1,600, you're never going to get there, right? You're just going to end up losing money. So that was awesome, Freddie. Thanks so much.
Sure.
One of the things that these guys are great at is that they take action, right? So we kind of put together a plan in terms of, you know, going through the course and stuff like that, you know, when to read what, when to listen to what, or whatever it is. And then they actually came up with, you know, something, we're each going to make X amount of calls every day, Monday through Friday, right? And the idea there is that you rise to the level of your systems, right? So it's not, okay, I want to have, you know, I want to have 100 units in 6 months or whatever it is. That's fine, but you can't really control that, right? What you can control is I am underwrite, you know, whatever, 40 deals over the next 6 months. And okay, how do I underwrite 40 deals? That means I've got to reach out to X amount of brokers every week. I can control that. I'm going to reach out and make cold calls or emails or texts, whatever it is, to X amount of owners every week. You can control all that. And these guys have been phenomenal at that. They're consistent. Now, Freddie and Mel just had a baby, right? So we give them a little grace, obviously, for that. But, you know, Mel's making her calls and she came up with this deal. And you know, one of the biggest takeaways, again, from the last time and this time as well, is if you don't ask, you don't know, right? If Mel hadn't said, hey, do you have anything else or whatever it is, which for everybody on here, that should be the last thing out of your mouth, no matter who you're talking to, should be, hey, what else do you have? Hey, what else do you have? Do you have something else coming down the pipe? Are you thinking about something else? Do you know somebody else that's selling something or whatever it is? Because again, if you don't ask, I think the last 2 or 3 deals we looked at came from asking, right? So, Mel and Joanna, anything you guys want to hop in with, or does somebody else have a deal they want to look at? We've kind of taken a little bit of time with this one, but I think there was value in some learning, I guess, topics here.
Probably a question on the underwriting part.
Mhm.
So like, let's say so like those like rent raises, I'm assuming in this deal were tied to the value add. And let's say if there's not much in the rehab to do, the property is in the good shape, but the rents are just low. So would you be flexible on your cap rate requirement in that situation?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. So would we be flexible on the
So,
cap
On
rate?
like the
We would-
benchmark? Yeah.
I think is it Hitansu? How do you pronounce? Is
Yes,
that
yes, yes,
Hitansu?
yes.
I think the question is, James, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hitansu, is um if the rents are just under market and we don't really have to do much of an upgrade or a heavy lift rehab per unit, so just maybe paint and carpet when the new lease is up and bring those rents up to market. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Let's say not even paint and carpet. Let's say like the owner just redid the units, but they haven't raised the rents for some reason. So would you be flexible in your benchmark of the cap rate? Like, yeah,
So
like
it's a little bit of a 2 different things, right? So yes and no, like a lot of stuff, right? In commercial real estate, it depends, right? So at the end of the day, the numbers tell you the story, right?
Mhm.
So if we're gonna have to go in and drop $6,000 a unit, right, to get to that level that we need to, when you look at your returns, because you're bringing more capital in, right, your returns are gonna go down, right? Now, if the person has just rehabbed everything, has not raised the rents or anything like that, then you've got less rehab budget to bring in. Therefore, your returns will go up. So they're a little bit separate. It doesn't really the level of rehab needed will impact the return that you can get for your investors, right?
Mhm.
But it doesn't really impact the cap rate, right? What they were doing there for a while was they would say, okay, great, this property is worth, $5 million or whatever it is, right? And the reason we're pricing it there is because we know that when you do X, X, and X, you'll be able to raise the rents, and then the property will be worth $6 million. And our pushback was, well, we only buy on actuals, right? And what they were doing was saying, we want you to give us half of the profit, right? Because of the price, right? And then you'll make X amount of dollars, and we wouldn't do that. So to kind of circle back, yeah, it doesn't matter on the amount of rehab in terms of the cap rate, right? We just need to be able to make the return, because at the end of the day, it's all about return on investment, right? You put in $1 million, you want to get X amount of dollars back per year, and on the back end, you want to get X amount of dollars back, right? So it's all about ROI.
Yes.
And the other thing that you may want to keep an eye out also is if you're changing tenants. I mean, if they leave, you're most likely going to have to do, at the very least, paint, carpet. Like you're not, very rare maybe that you'd be able to just say one person leave and they leave it in a condition where you can bring somebody else in. So you're still going to spend something in the rehab, and if it's and you also have to consider that even if it was just bringing the rents up, how long are the leases, how long will you have to wait, and then if they choose to remain, if you are going to renew the leases, there may be just a certain amount that you can increase them, or then you do have to pretty much change, re-tenant the unit, and then you're probably spending some of that as well. So
I see. Yeah, the reason I was just asking, I had a similar sort of situation with the seller. I'm like still yet to go deep into it, but it's almost same. 8 units, almost a gross rent per month is same, about like 5,800, and he was asking for 500,000, and he is in the process of rehabbing the units. Uh, so that's why the question came up. If he rehabs the unit, would we be flexible in the cap rate? Yeah, I
I don't
got
think
you
it's so
there.
much the cap rate. I think it's more of if you're not going to have to bring in all the rehab money. Let's say that they hadn't rehabbed anything, right? And you were going to need to bring in $5,000 a unit, so $40,000 or whatever it is, right? You're going to have to bring that in. Obviously, that's going to affect your return, right? So you can only pay X amount of dollars to get that return. Now, if they are going to do all the rehab before you take over and not raise the rents, then yes, you can afford to pay a little bit more, right? Because you're not spending $40,000 in rehab, but you can pay a little bit more and still get the exact same return, right? At the end of the day, the cap rate is a benchmark, right? But your real number that you want to look at is the return on investment, right?
Right.
That's why people invest, right? Return
Right.
on investment, right? Kind of thing. So yeah, so it's kind of a bench. I know somebody that has done this for 40 years, I think. Last time I spoke to him, and last time I was talking to him, he's like, James, I don't even use cap rates anymore. I'm just all about the cash flow. And this guy's been super, super successful, right? And I was like, well, that's interesting. You don't hear a lot of people say that, but he's been very, very successful with it. But we still like to use a cap rate kind of as a general kind of guide, if you will. Just off the bat, it's like, wow, something they're asking a 4 cap, money's at 6. I can't afford to pay what they're paying, what they're asking for, kind of thing. So,
Gotcha.
Are you going to follow up with that guy with the 8 unit?
Yes. I will. We will meet most likely next week. And like you said, if the return is good, you can be flexible because he has offered me that he would be open to do the seller finance as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's the same thing. If the seller finance reduces my debt service, then the return increases, and I can probably afford to pay a little bit more.
So at the end of the day, there's 2 things that you want from the seller, right? You either want price or terms, right? So there's so many creative things you can do. Putting deals together, especially like at 100 units and below, right? But even some of the bigger ones now, big institutions are taking back paper basically, which is owner financing, right? If you have questions or something like that, when I send you you have my email because you sent me an email. Just send me an email. We'll hop on the phone for a couple minutes or whatever it is, and I'll try and help you any way I can. Because there's all sorts of cool stuff that you can do to make sure that it's a win for the seller, but it's still a win for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Good deal. Anybody else? Emma, you been looking at anything lately, or? Or Stephanie or Melvin, you been looking at anything lately?
I guess I'll chime in a little bit. Just single family, we're just noticing a lot of the auctions are getting lower prices. They were being outrageous. HUD Home Stores starting to pop out with some stuff. Sellers are actually becoming more creative in thinking about it, and some of the agents are actually I don't know that whole story with the 1% now, their commissions and stuff, but I have a feeling they'll start presenting more creative options to sellers, and Just seems like they're getting agents are actually getting a little more interested in creative, whereas before they wouldn't even kind of hear of it or just say no and not ever take the offer. So I think a little bit things are loosening up for a lot of good deals coming down the pike if you're in a good position to take advantage.
Agreed.
That's good to know. In terms of seller financing, there are really an enormous amount of different things you can do to still make it a win for the seller and do it for yourself. The only thing I would caution you on is that some newer investors hear that someone is offering seller financing, and it's almost like immediately, wow, this has got to be a good deal because they're willing to paper and I can get in easier. Sometimes the reason they're offering seller financing, not always, but just be careful of this. Sometimes when they're offering seller financing is because they know no institution is going to lend on their property at a reasonable enough rate that it makes sense to the buyer. So owner financing, fantastic, but just we've had a couple of those that people have brought us, and it's like, the reason you're asking this is because no one's going to finance your property, right? Being able
outrageous price.
Yeah,
Right.
but hey, owner financing, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
So
And it's getting harder. It's getting harder to finance. So even if the bank will or the institutions, it's taking longer, and some of the deals are like falling through if there's a time limit, or some of these little lending companies and all that, they're adding on the fees and appraisals, and then it went longer than 30 days. So whoops, you need to pay another fee. So there's some different things going on with that we've seen.
there's Nicole and Renard and I were actually talking about this the other day in terms of a lot of these guys that bought at high prices, single family, multifamily, whatever, right, are now getting to the point where they have to refinance and they're upside down. So today I got an offer on a note, right? For someone that I have tremendous respect for. He's a very, very, very large syndicator and it's done very well, but even he got caught. So the challenge is that they need to raise, I want to say, I've got to go back and look at the email. It's either $7 or $8 million because they need to bring that to the table for the bank to be able to refinance out of their property. And they also want to buy, I think, an interest cap. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and look at it. So, there's an opportunity there. This is something they did that was very different, but there's also an opportunity there where you might be able to buy equity in a building. So, for example, someone needs to refinance, but they need to bring whatever, $300,000 to the table and they don't have it. You can always say, I'll bring $300,000 to the table, but I want 50% of the equity or X amount of the equity. It gets a little more complex, but it's just negotiating. You can negotiate anything, right? And do really, really well.
Just had one more question on the underwriting part. But in terms of the maintenance and repairs, and in terms of the capex, what's like your range for the door per year for those two things?
For capex?
For both, like repairs and maintenance and the capex. I would think that those would go in the separate buckets, right?
Yes. So capex by definition is stuff that you're going to do to enhance the value of the property that is not standard, right? I'm going to put on new roofs. I'm going to rehab. I'm going to do landscape, whatever it may be. There is no set amount, if you will, in terms of what your capex should be. From a return standpoint, and again, take this with a grain of salt, right? It's a little bit different, but I would like to get my money back on whatever I invest in terms of capex in 3 to 4 years, if not less, right? So if I'm going to invest $5,000, right, I want to be able to make $5,000 in upside over the next 3 years, which is, what is that, 17, months, I can't think of the math right now, but if I got an extra $100, an extra $150 a month for that upside, then in 3 years, I would make my investment back, basically, right?
Right.
And in terms of percentages, it's so funny because I think, Freddie, you and I were talking about this, I think just recently, in terms of per door cost for maintenance. There have been rule of thumbs in the past. Rule of thumbs are a little bit all over the place now just because everything has gotten so incredibly expensive, right? I wish I could tell you, oh, yeah, rule of thumb, X amount of dollars, for repairs, X amount of dollars for contract, X amount of dollars or whatever it may be. I can only tell you from our experience, and our experience is that across the board, even when the new prices and stuff like that, we're at 45% because insurance goes up, so we need to try and save money somewhere else, right? If I were underwriting something, I would definitely get an insurance quote, right? Number one. And number two, obviously during your due diligence, whenever you want to do it, or even before you do diligence, I would walk through with whoever you're going to have to actually do the work and give you today's prices, right? Because I don't know what the math is, but 5 years ago, a 2x4 was X dollars, right? And now a 2x4 is X times 3, right? Jane and Sharon can tell you horror stories about insurance in Florida, right? Or anywhere near the water, I guess. And that seems to be affecting companies not only near the water, but other areas also. Even if you're 100 miles from the water, the insurance still seems to be going up because the insurance companies are losing so much money over here, they need to make it up somewhere. But Jane and Sharon, you guys know more about that than anybody else does in terms of insurance in Florida. You want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going up. A lot of companies are leaving. Some companies that used to be fairly decent, they're just going up. I mean, all our stuff is just, and there's a lot of people leaving Florida. A lot of people flocked here, but now they're leaving because especially landlords and rental properties, I guess, and now they're trying to sell. Now the rents are coming down because people can't, we blew everybody out of the water with, let's just raise it up to 3,000 because we can. And now, I mean, I know somebody that has a fully rehabbed, he gutted it, fully rehabbed, very nice house in Northport, that was getting, probably could have got upwards of 3,000. And now he's had it on there for months. He can't sell it. He can't lease option it. I mean, he's being a little bit stubborn, but now his rent has dropped down to 1,800. So, and I venture to say his insurance is, he's going to have a hefty insurance bill because he is closer to the canals and such down there. So insurance is a problem. I think they're trying to address it here. I'm sure Texas is another issue, on the other side with the damage, and weather is just unpredictable. So we've actually seen insurance go up across the board with some of our other houses.
That's a great point. And I think also in terms of rents, rents have gone out very aggressively for a long time. And I read something today where Austin, where a lot of people kind of did the same thing. Unfortunately, Austin, I've never been there, but it sounds fantastic. But it got very expensive because a lot of new jobs came in and stuff like that. And people are starting to actually not leave a lot, but some of the people are starting to leave. And some of the challenges are that insurance there, for whatever reason, has gotten very expensive. And they built a lot of stuff in Austin. And I think over the last 12 months, rents have actually gone down 16%. Right. So when you're doing your rent estimates for further down the road, we've always underwritten at 2%, right? Which is very, very conservative. In some areas, you may even want to underwrite at 0% for the first year or two to see, how the market does, just again, to be conservative and not get caught at a point where your top line revenue doesn't match what you need for it to match to be able to make any money.
And I can't speak to all of Austin, but only been there, I think, once. And there was a big homeless population. So whether that's from the rents going up, but I mean, we're talking downtown, stepping over people.
Oh my God!
Trying to get places. So California influx, high rents. Now nobody.
California.
Yeah, and then people can't afford it, and then they become homeless. And you have the homeless population downtown and people flocking out. So
yeah, that's craziness, man. So hold on a second, let me find something here. Whoops, where'd it go? Too many screens open. There we go. Okay. So Hitachi, hopefully we haven't blown you out. And you're like, oh my God, I'm never buying anything. It's too crazy.
No. I'm good.
You just got to be conservative and you just got to have deal flow, right? Deal flow is very, very important. Otherwise you end up focusing
Yes.
so much on the one deal and trying to make it work because you don't have another one coming around the corner.
Yes. And since this is a long game, so these ups and downs will just gonna like keep coming.
Absolutely. So yeah, definitely. Listen, you've been on here several times. If you have questions or something like that, just reach out to me and we'll help you any way we can.
I appreciate this.
Okay. All right. So it is 7:30. Any final questions, comments, things you want to share? Real estate related only? We're all good? Okay.
All
Next week, we're doing multifamily. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay safe out there. And we will talk to you guys very, very soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you very
Bye.
much. Good night.